How does somebody actually change as a person? This is something I've been thinking about for a very, very, very long time because I have a lot of personal hangups and internalized beliefs that are incredibly damaging to my psyche and just prevent me from being the best person I can be and creating the best work that I can. And despite how much like self-help bullshit I watch, no matter how many people I talk to, and no matter how much positive reaffirming that I get from people, these internalized concepts do not budge. And so it can't really be said that you change via the acquisition of new data, because I have tons of new data in terms of seeing these points, right? There are so many negative values that I hold as somebody who's just like struggled with self-image for such a long time. It's no secret. Anybody who's been following me for a while knows that like there's a constant battle, and I'm sure a lot of people listening can probably relate to this, is that there's a voice in your head that's constantly criticizing you. Like, this is not something unique to me. But the interesting thing I've always found about it is that, like, if I'm having an argument with somebody and we're discussing, I don't know, something unrelated to myself, and I have a position, and they have another position, if they present me enough facts and evidence and just like make a persuasive argument, I will change my mind about something because, like, oh, here is a better set of data that more accurately reflects reality than what I had available to me at the time. You have convinced me. Your argument is better than mine. Therefore, I will adopt your position because it makes more sense to me. It is more informed, and it is simply a better position on this subject to have. This is something that happens all the time. But despite, on paper, having a better argument for a lot of these, like, choke points for my own personal perceptions of myself and what I do, the script never flips. So there must be something, there's two possibilities, I suppose. Either when it comes to like really ingrained personal beliefs about yourself, especially negative ones, there either is another ingredient that needs to be there beyond just being presented with a better set of data, or somewhere subconsciously, I don't actually believe this data. Like, despite hearing the fucking self-help shit and getting the affirmations from, you know, friends and family, those things, despite making sense on a conscious level, are perhaps not cogent enough for the subconscious level to accept them, and therefore the bad ideas still persist. And this is always the interesting thing, because I listen to a lot of Gary Vaynerchuk, and he's always telling people to, like, stop being negative and stop comparing yourself to others and all this shit. And my response to this is always, how? How do you do that? And when other people ask how, his response is always, you have to surround yourself with more positive people. And I'm like, I'm not surrounded by negative people. You know, the people that I'm surrounded with are not negative. I wouldn't go so far as to say, like, my group of friends are, like, overly positive to, like, a comedic degree. You know, a caricature of positivity. But, like, nobody I hang out with is, like, overtly, blatantly cynical. There might be, like, one person, you know, but the person I can think of who is overly cynical, I don't even, like, hang out with often. You know, I know cynical people, but I don't, like, spend lots of time with cynical people. I would argue I'm probably one of the most cynical people that I know, at least in terms of myself. Because, again, image issues. So, Gary's saying surround yourself with better people, right? And I don't think the people's the problem. So if that doesn't work, what's the next step? And there's never really a next step explained. That kind of seems to be his end position. Because he's always talking about, like, you know, if you're comparing yourself to others, it's wrong and it's doing damage. And I understand that it's doing damage to me, because every time I log into twitter.com and I see people doing amazing work, I'm like, why am I even fucking bothering? And, like, maybe I am just not convinced, right? Because perhaps, I know there is a part of me that when I hear don't compare yourself to others, my knee-jerk reaction is like, but you need to compare yourself to others to a certain degree. That's how you kind of can have a metric of where your progress is. Like, how would I be able to understand that, like, opening up Blender and having a default cube and hitting subdivide and making it like a circle isn't worth caring about unless I look into the wider world and see that that's, like, the first thing everybody does. In order to understand where I am in the grand scheme of things, where my progress is, how I am doing, there needs to be some sort of scale that you can measure yourself against in order to understand your relative position. This seems logical to me. So while I don't think comparing yourself constantly and using that as like a really hardcore rule for everything is good, because clearly it's doing bad things to me, if I could just kind of sit down and do more of the work and stop stressing so much about followers and interaction and engagement and patrons and all that shit, and just like did more work and stopped comparing myself, especially to people, because the people around me are doing completely different mediums on completely different scales, and so like the apples to apples comparison makes no sense. But if I didn't log on to twitter.com and I didn't see people who are in their early 20s who got a legitimate education and were able to create photorealistic sculpts, animate them, put them into Unreal Engine 4, and make a complete 3D video game before they're 25, all on their own, I would have no way of knowing that the fact that I'm screwing around in a baby engine that requires no coding and can only do very simple box modeling, I wouldn't know that I still have a long way to go. And like, if there's no comparison, I feel like the lack of comparison invites egotism. Because if I don't know where I am in the grand pecking order, I just would naturally kind of fall back on like, I'm fucking great. Maybe I wouldn't, but that just seems like a natural thing to go. And so like, even just having this internal conversation with myself right now, it kind of makes me realize that probably the reason I haven't kind of been able to flip the script on a lot of these things is that I probably do have a lot of subconscious explanations that get around the arguments that are presented to me. So then the question, I suppose, becomes, how do you actually change yourself? How do I overcome these arguments? I guess I need someone to present a better argument than what I have heard online and from people I know. And my natural question then becomes, where do I go to get this argument? Because the one time I did therapy, back in like 2015, I think, every time I tried to like argue, like the therapist would sit me down and like talk to me about shit, and I would push back. And the reason I'm pushing back is this very reason, right? It's an argument. And I'm not trying to like purposely argue with somebody, but when you tell me something and I have doubts, I'm going to express my doubts in the hope that the person who is trying to help me can shoot down those doubts, can present to me the better argument. But when I tried to do that, I was just chastised for being negative. It's like, I'm not trying to be negative. I want you to defeat these bad ideas with good ideas. And so I guess I just haven't found the person to give me the good argument that beats the bad argument in my brain. And so the question and I always swing back to it, how do I become more positive? How do I stop comparing myself to others? What is the argument that would allow me to change my mind? Because for the entirety of my adult life, from like 15 on, when I started being creative, this has been the mode of operation that I've worked on. Coming from a very low self-esteem, very negative on my work, and every time I rise to a higher level, that becomes the new normal that anybody could do if they just put in a little bit of effort, because I've put in barely any effort, because there are people better than me, because I have the internet, and I can tell that we're operating on a global scale, and there are clearly people way better who have done way more in less time. So like, there is a scale, and I'm low on the scale, and every step I take, the world around me takes 10 steps. I'm looking for that better argument, and I guess I just haven't heard it yet. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of the Hyperbolic Whine Chamber. In addition to doing podcasts, I also make a bunch of 3D models and animations, which you can check out at twitter.com/TommyOliverSays. I'm also making a video game called Izumi and the Vertical Slice, and I have a simple game out right now called Ninja Suffering. You can check those out linked on said Twitter profile. If you want to help support the show and keep me making it and keeping it ad-free, you can check out patreon.com/PolyStation2 or subscribestar.com/TomOliver. Patrons have access to over 70 bonus podcasts, so if you like this podcast and want more right now, that's the place to do it. Thanks again for listening. This podcast updates 3 days a week, ideally, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so feel free to subscribe on your preferred platform so you can catch new episodes as they come out. And patrons get episodes a week early. That's all I got for now. Have a good one.